Hey everyone, and in this video we're going to be talking about methods to succeed in chemical engineering or in engineering in general. I've been very fortunate to have been very successful here at Georgia Tech and to have a lot of academic success even while maintaining my social and mental well-being for the most part. And reflecting back on my time, I think there's a couple of things that really helped me get through university in one piece. And I'd like to share some of those with you today. So firstly, I think it's very important to call yourself a chemical engineer, even if you don't have the degree yet. Some might call blasphemy, but I think having a vision of yourself as a chemical engineer is so important for giving you the motivation to get through it all. I had a friend who was a chemical engineer and he got about 30 to 40% through the course. Super smart guy, and I thought he could go all the way, but he decided to switch to CS. And you know, he's happy in CS because that's something he envisions himself doing and it's something that he enjoys. I think when it comes to engineering, it's very important that you have that vision of like, okay, what problems and challenges do I want to solve in the future? And have that compelling vision of chemical engineering. That makes it more motivating to get through everything. And as you solve chemical engineering problems, you'll be like, okay, I'm a chemical engineer, I can solve these problems. It gives you that innate confidence that you can overcome all the challenges that come your way. Secondly, is to work smarter, not harder. Now, everyone says that, but how do you actually work smarter? And it comes down to two things, the who and the what. Who do you work with and what do you work on? Not how hard you work. So let's start with who. Engineering is inherently a cooperative venture. In the workplace, in industry, there are always interdisciplinary teams of engineers that are working to solve any given problem. You're never really solving a problem on your own. You always have that support network. So in school, it's especially important that you kind of mimic that environment and find people who complement your strengths or who are smarter than you. That's what helped me. I found people who I thought were very smart or they complemented me in some way, especially for lab groups, because having a good lab group can help you get through labs so much quicker and so much more efficiently. So for example, for me, I tend to be very concept oriented. I can understand concepts very well, but I tend to fudge up the details sometimes. I don't pay attention to the little details. So I tried to find people who were more detail oriented than me, and I had those people, especially in my lab groups, and they helped to make sure that the finer details in every single lab report or project report was in good shape. And secondly is the what. And this comes down to the 80-20 rule. 80% of all the results that you generate come from 20% of the work. So if you think about that, then it becomes like, okay, well, maybe I should focus more of my efforts on that 20%. So what goes into that 20%? What are those high ticket items? And it comes down to improving your two areas where you might be weak in. Your knowledge gaps or execution gaps. So the analogy I like to use for this is like a toolbox or a workshop, right? You go into a workshop, let's say you're a mechanic or a carpenter. First of all, there's knowing what each tool does, what the purpose of each tool is, and how to use it, like the theoretical, like how do you use this tool? And that's your knowledge gap. Knowledge gaps are what, your professors, your TAs, your friends who have taken the course or are taking the course but understand it very well, they can help you with that. So going to office hours and working with, like I said, the smart people that understand the topics is going to help you get through that problem easier and help you bridge that knowledge gap. They'll help you understand how to use the tools available at your disposal. And then secondly is the execution gap, and that can only come through with practice. So doing a lot of practice problems and learning how to use the tools. As you practice with the tools in the workshop, then you become a better carpenter or mechanic, etc. So for me at least, like I said earlier, I'm pretty good with concepts, so the knowledge gaps tended to be a strong suit for me. I could overcome the knowledge gaps pretty easily. So then my studying focus was not so much on reviewing notes. I didn't spend much time reviewing notes. In fact, most of my friends will tell you my notes are abysmal. They're quite messy and it's kind of just, chicken scratch. But what really helped propel me into success was practicing problems. I did every single practice test that I could get my hands on. I redid the homeworks, and I made sure that practice that I was getting is making me comfortable with the tools. So that intentional point of like, okay, I know the tools, how to use it. I'm now going to learn how to utilize those tools so that when it comes to the test, I can use those in any myriad of ways. And then third is to minimize your degrees of freedom. And so what do I mean by this? So in engineering problems, you'll often find that you have more variables than you have equations, so you have a positive number of degrees of freedom. And this means that there are an infinite number of solutions. So for example, if you're designing a reactor, your variables are, what is the size of your reactor? What's your conversion? How much are you, converting? What's your flow rate or your production rate? What's your operating temperature and pressure? So on, right? So these are all, variables that come into designing your reactor. And, you have an infinite number of ways you can combine those variables. So that's something that becomes very like, okay, well, how do you find the optimal blend of those variables, right? And life is like that too. You have infinite combinations of how you can spend your time, and how you can work to utilize your time. And if you don't have a plan for that time, you end up choosing the more inefficient routes. Work tends to expand and take up all your time. This is Parkinson's law in action, right? Work expands to take up the time you allotted, and if you allot all your time to it, then it will just naturally take up all your time. So the solution to this is to reduce your degrees of freedom, to set the variables in your problem so that you can solve for the unknown, right? So for a reactor, I might say, okay, I want this conversion, so I want 90% of my reactor to convert. I want this production rate, and this is the temperature and pressure. Now that I've set all these variables, now the size of my reactor can only be one variable, or one value. There's only one possible size of reactor that will give me those results. So same way in life, the way we reduce degrees of freedom is to set up our non-negotiables. What are the variables that we want to be a certain value? So maybe that's time with your family and friends. Maybe that's a hobby that you're particularly passionate about. But having that time set aside, and that's like non-negotiable, okay, this is the time, that fixes the amount of time that you have for work. So it's like, okay, well, I'm only going to be working during these times. For me, what I really tried to do is like, okay, I'm not going to work past 9 o'clock. I'm not going to, there's a block of time on my weekends where I'm doing golf, or I'm spending time with my girlfriend. That's time that I've allotted. I've said, okay, this is the time that I'm not going to be doing work in. And the rest of the time is now I work. And now since I know how much time I'm working for, it just naturally makes you more focused to the point where you're naturally optimizing your own time. You're naturally doing the things that we talked about earlier. You're really focusing on those high ticket items, focusing on who you work with, because your time is valuable and you don't want to work with people who are, goofing off and unfocused. You want to get your work done so you can enjoy those time blocks that you've set for yourself. But that's all that I have for this video. If you enjoyed it, please share and click here to see the latest video.